Hey there, welcome to Content Waves, a podcast about content-led innovation and the people in the space who are doing some really, really cool things. I'm your host, Monica, and today's guest is Cameron Tape, a Content.ai support engineer and coffee expert. So what does content management and coffee actually have in common? I promise this is not clickbait. Cameron has drawn some really interesting parallels that we're excited to share with you today. Let's get into it. Hey Cameron, thank you so much for joining us on Content Waves. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So yeah, I'm glad we could find time. I'm in Prague and you're in Sydney, so I'm sure we're meeting at different energy levels today, but I'm sure our conversation will be great. So the reason I asked you to be a guest on the podcast is kind of selfish reasons, I would say, because I found out that you're actually a coffee expert, like a literal coffee expert, and I needed to know more about that. So would you introduce yourself to our listeners and sort of tee up the theme for today?
Sure. I'm Cameron. Obviously, I work here at Content.ai. I'm part of the support team. Before working with Content.ai, I was in the coffee industry for about 15, 16 years. So I've done sort of everything there, from working at cafes, running cafes, learning a little bit of roasting. I've been to like some coffee grading sort of sessions. I wasn't directly involved in like buying or going to origin growing areas, but I've done some of the grading and assessing learning and courses that you would do for that. I've done training, helped one of my previous employers also ran a consulting and training company, so I used to help him deliver workshops. Co-hosted a couple of events. I ran one of my own workshops for people trying to find work in the coffee industry. I've done train the trainer sessions as like one of the assistant co-hosts, I guess is the word I'm looking for there. Yeah, so I've done a lot of different coffee related activities in my time, and now found myself in a completely different industry, working in content management. But that sort of, I guess, led to why we're here today, because you and I have had some previous offline discussions about some of the similarities I've seen between the two. And I guess some of the things that are more connected to human nature that I see playing out the same way in the coffee industry and the content industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say they're completely different. We probably, a little bit more similar than we all think. And I think that's a really interesting through line that I wanted to explore today with you. So, but first things first, of course, and as somebody who is not, the biggest connoisseur of coffee, as you may be, who has 15 plus years of experience, what makes a good coffee? We all want to know.
Right. So back when I was working in coffee, I always used to like discussing this. I have very strong opinions myself on what I like in a coffee. And I will often argue black and blue with that, even with people who I respect and probably know better than me. I will still argue with them. But yeah, I really think ultimately that comes down to the person drinking it. I've said this many a time to people in the coffee industry and customers and interested folks. I can argue black and blue about what I like. I can use like fancy equipment where you shine like you shine concentrated light into the coffee liquid and it refracts back, and judging the angle that it refracts back at, you can actually calculate how much coffee is in it as opposed to water, and you can use that to argue whether or not it's well brewed and you've made it the way you intended. Or really none of that matters if the person that I give that cup of coffee to doesn't like it. I have this argument with my parents all the time. We like very different things in coffee. They think the coffee I like is bad. I will tell them exactly why the coffee they like is bad. But at the end of the day, everyone likes what they like. There's no point arguing with that. And I really think ultimately the biggest contributor to what makes a good coffee is what the person drinking it likes.
That's a surprising and actually refreshing take. For me, at least, as when you hear an expert talk about something, they want to often show like an objective take on this is good, this is quality, this is the best method. So this is something that you, if you don't enjoy it, then you're not really a coffee person, or you're not really getting it, for example. So that's an interesting take.
Yeah, I used to describe myself as an anti-coffee snob, coffee snob. That I am very snobby about the coffee that I drink, but as someone working in a cafe, I don't like the attitude that sometimes comes with that. I think also like there are people whose job it is to like go to countries, go to farms where they're growing coffee, assess these. They need to have ways to talk about things as being good, bad, scoring them. It might be a little more important for someone in that role, I guess, to be more forceful in saying this is good, this is bad. And obviously myself in a customer facing role making coffee in a cafe probably colors my perception in thinking, well, it really matters what the customer wants. I guess it also kind of depends on what your goal is and what angle you're coming at it from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that leads us nicely to our parallel of this coffee and content management, because as the role that you're in as a barista in the past and support engineer, you do care about your craft. There are best practices. There is advice on how to be successful, but you also care about your customers. You want them to be happy and satisfied and feel good about what they're doing. So I think you have a really cool and unique vantage point and experience. So basically the reason we wanted to chat today. So how can you help us folks in content think about what we're doing in maybe some new ways?
Sure. So one of the things I know you and I briefly discussed, I think this came up actually many, many weeks ago first. One of the things I used to think about a lot working in cafes is like simplifying processes and simplicity versus complexity. There's merits to both. Speaking about coffee for a moment, there are people I know that I've worked with or that I follow online who obsess over every tiny detail. They will measure everything that they can. They will bend over backwards and spend months coming up with new techniques to try to get like a 0.01% improvement on some variable. And I am incredibly grateful for those people because they really do push things forward a lot. And it's also really great for like coffee competitions, things like that.
Right.
I always thought of myself as more of a simplifier. A lot of those things I feel don't necessarily work in a busy cafe on a day-to-day basis. Like if I'm making 1,000 or more coffees a day, which sometimes I have to, doing the same thing over and over and over. If some new thing takes me like 5 seconds longer over the course of a day, that's hours of time. Like it's just not functional. And throughout the day, if I'm on my feet working for 8 hours a day, the reality is I'm going to get tired. I'm going to have some good moments and some bad moments. So I always like to keep things as simple as possible. Because I'm doing something so many times in a day, I like to keep it simple and streamlined. So I would always get really excited if I could find some new way to approach a problem that would get me, one of those sort of 80-20 splits where I could get like most of the advantage of what these people are doing in competitions, get me most of the way there with the least amount of effort and the least amount of time. Or if a new tool came out that could automate some part of the process. There's always a lot of conflict about this in coffee circles. I think that's starting to settle down a bit. My personal take, though, was if a machine can do something that might not be as good as me at my best, but it can do it consistently every time over a busy day where I'm doing this hundreds, if not 1,000 times in a day, it's not going to be as good as me at my best, but it's going to be a lot better than me at my worst. And it's going to mean, end of the day, the customer gets a consistent experience and they know what they can expect. So I would always be really happy about those things. I would sort of love those things. And that's actually part of what I loved about content.ai when I started here. Even when I was just going through the interview process, I kid you not, the first time I booted up our app and saw what this platform can do, I just started giggling at my desk So I was so excited. It it just gives you this way to make things as complex or as simple as you need them to be. For me, I was really drawn to that ability to simplify making a certain type of content. For example, the first thing I saw was creating like articles and shop items for funnily enough, a coffee sample site that we used to use. And just seeing how you could like create that framework to make it so much easier to just create the same type of content over and over again without having to think like, oh, like where do I need to put this? How do I need to format that? Being able to put guidelines in to make doing the same thing over and over so much simpler. But then you also have that freedom to add complexity, build a really complex layered structure if that's what you need, or keep it very simple for things that you need to do all the time when that's what you need. I thought that was incredible when I first started working with the platform. And I think that is an important thing to keep in mind in content as well as in coffee. If you need to do something over and over and over and keep it consistent, you probably want to have that as simple as possible. But it's always good to have that option to ramp up the complexity when you have something like very niche that needs to be done a very particular way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you bring up a great point. I love that perspective on complexity, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's an opportunity when you need it to be. The only time when complexity is a bad thing is when you mention that you need to do something over and over and over again, or it's unnecessary complexity, or it's not needed or doesn't add anything special to the process or make it that point, whatever, 1% better, then it feels frustrating for content creators, frustrating for users of a software, for example, when they're always trying to find those moments of efficiency, and they're always also wanting to be a little playful, but they need to have the right things at the right time to do that. So then, what's some advice that you would give then? You talked about simplicity and complexity. I think this is a really cool through line. So in your line of work, in your support areas as well, what advice would you give here around this theme?
So one of the things that I keep coming back to in talking to my colleagues here at Content.ai, in talking to our customers when they're asking for advice setting up, and that I used to talk to people about in coffee as well, is speak to the people doing the work. Always, we all know that we should do this, consult with our stakeholders. Like I think every industry is aware that this is a good practice, but it doesn't mean that everyone does it. Even in a cafe, it's very common that a cafe owner doesn't necessarily always listen super closely to the people doing the work every day, particularly if they're not like an owner operator who's there every day. Similarly for customers, like what is their experience? They're an important stakeholder, which is not to say I don't understand. There are also like business needs and financial aspects to these decisions. But I think getting back more to what we're talking about, like once that decision's made and you're in there, like speak to the people that actually have to work with that thing, to really understand their needs. And that could be, in the case of content, your content workers, also your developers. Obviously, we're at a very content-focused part of that equation, but developers also need to be able to work with the end product. And they might they might understand when you need that slightly more complex things to achieve certain things. But yeah, just speak to the people doing the work and listen, and they will often know, even if they can't necessarily communicate it super clearly, thinking specifically about cafes. But the people doing the work will usually know what things need to be simplified, where you can't really find those ways to simplify things because certain things have to be done just so. And listen to the people who are closest to the work, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really nice advice, especially when we've seen that our customers and the users of our platform are, as you mentioned, they know what they want, or they're much more tech savvy than maybe many years ago, and maybe in the coffee space as well. People maybe know coffee a little bit better than historically they did, because there's so much more information out there. There's so much more choice, I think, than there used to be. So. When you speak to the users, you are speaking with people who do have something to say. They know what they want to accomplish, and they generally know what they want to get out of it, but you just are helping them get there, really optimize or the approach with your specific tooling. So I wanted to talk a little bit more around this sort of tooling idea, because when we were planning this episode as well, you brought up some really cool I wouldn't say nerdy things, but really cool things about the coffee space as well, in terms of what are tools, what are gadgets, things like that. So talk us through a little bit around this idea of what is a tool and how is it useful, and how can that work in a content space? How can that work in a coffee space? But what should our mindset be around the tools that we select and what we bring into the work that we're doing and then have to use every day, for example?
Yeah, well, this actually, again, is quite related to this previous point of speaking to the people doing the work. So, yeah, coffee is often a very craze or hype-driven industry. Someone will come out with a new gadget, or some new varietal of coffee, or grown in a new region, or processed in a different way, and everyone loves to lose their minds over it. Like when the latest Xbox releases and it has like 5 gigabytes more storage than the last one, and we all have to, or a phone, we all have to run out and buy them. This happens, I guess, in a lot of industries, but yeah, coffee definitely. I know at one point in particular, there's some new toy being used in competitions, and so they started popping up everywhere in cafes, and like I had a chance to work with them, and they're great. I won't go into the specifics of what the item was. It's not particularly relevant, but it was great for what it was meant to do. It's just that what it was meant to do wasn't all that helpful outside of the competition space, and just created extra work in the cafe space without necessarily improving things. Again, like it might offer some improvement on the worst version of what you might do without it. But this was one of those ones where really with just some very basic training, even someone who's been making coffee for a month could get to a point where they probably didn't need it. And it did add just a few extra seconds to every single coffee that you made. I hated this thing. It used to drive me nuts that I would like see it everywhere. In my own testing, it actually made my coffees worse. According to my testing, other people's testing, different results. But yeah, I tested at the cafe I was working along, not just myself, but everyone there tried using it and without, and we found slightly worse results overall. But yeah, these things happen. We get these fads. Something looks cool or looks like it does something really helpful, but then when you try to introduce it into your day-to-day work, it doesn't necessarily pan out. I think we can all agree the tech industry is somewhat prone to the same thing. We all love to jump on the new cool thing. Sometimes it pays out, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, again, I think that comes back to that speaking to the people who are doing the work. Like it's very easy to see something and think like, oh, we're going to start doing this. This is the new trend. This, or like this new tool, this new software, it's going to change the way we do everything. And it doesn't always necessarily work out for the people using it. It might not work with the other tools and software that you use, or it might just add unnecessary complexity, unnecessary steps. You always want to speak to those people doing the work, and I guess take that step back and think like, am I adding this to solve a problem that I have? Like, is this a problem that I actually have and that actually needs solving, or am I adding something because I think it's cool? I think, unfortunately, we all end up defaulting to the latter more often than we would like to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to mention as well, similar to you, if you're more outcome focused or trying to actually solve a specific challenge and then finding those cool gadgets, or even maybe there's just a better process or a better way to think about things. So I can imagine people come to you in support as well, and they have a challenge to solve, and you can tell them about a new feature, or you can tell them about a new way of thinking about something, or a new process that they haven't thought about before. So using what they already have in ways that can solve their problems. So I can imagine you can go a lot of different directions when you're providing advice to folks. And I think that's maybe a responsibility for your role, but also maybe a cool part to find new creative ways to think about doing something. So one of the things we talked about as well is your role in support specifically. Is this really cool? I want to zoom in more on this. So you want to ensure that the customers do have the best outcomes, of course. And what would you say then is, besides the tools, besides the gadgets, what's something actually helping customers have the best success with their projects?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Obviously, we get all sorts of queries and things coming in through support. Circling back to what you were just saying about shifting mindsets, though, this is probably one of my favorite recurring patterns of conversation, is when someone comes in with a particular situation saying like, how do I accomplish this thing? I've tried adding this, and this as a workaround. Sometimes, and it's great when it happens, you'd be like, well, actually, there's a really simple way to do that. If you take away all of that, there's a way simpler way to do this that already exists and fits in neatly with your current setup. Or you make this one little tweak and you don't need to change these 5 other things. I always love those moments, as I said. Like, I love to keep things simple as much as possible. Yeah, so in terms of like setting up a project and this idea of like, thoughtful tooling versus like the nice shiny thing. Again, like, speak to your stakeholders, figure out like what you actually need. Like, we always recommend, if you're, say, migrating into content.ai, you want to do this content audit first, figure out what content you need, what content you don't. And I think try to do the same sort of thing with your content model and your project structure. Like, what do you think? I would suggest coming from a place of thinking like, what is the bare minimum that I absolutely need? And, only building on top of that when you're sure that you need it. I think it's very common when we run into a complication or a challenge, or we want to do a certain thing and we don't know how. I think it's very common that the first thought would be, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to add? What new thing needs to happen to enable this? But sometimes it can be really powerful to flip that around and think, well, what can I take away to make this easier? Or how can I do this without adding on to what I'm already doing? I think that can be very powerful. And in a lot of situations that I've seen in support, it can make life a lot easier for the people working with the product. Often, trying to like set up some relationship between different bits of content, you can end up adding like 3 different things to try and like get something going on there. But often it's as simple as taking all of that away and using some content structure that you already have, or refactoring something into a reusable piece of content so that you don't need to do it over and over again. I don't know. I'm really enamored with this idea of assuming that the simplest approach is the best until you're certain that it's not.
Wow, that's pretty cool to hear. I'm curious how then customers respond to that advice, though. They've to hear do less. What is that like coming from you, and or how do you position it to make sure that they see this simplicity as the way to go, for example? Or do they already know that innately and they just need somebody to help them along?
I mean, it depends. It's always a case by case basis, right? Sometimes I will evangelize simplicity, and a customer will respond with, "Well, that doesn't work because X, Y, Z," and they have a number of good points. But to me, that kind of actually reinforces what I was saying. I like to assume complexity. They've proven that they need to add something. Beautiful, add it then. Like, those are the cases where you should. Always a case by case basis. Like, people are people. A lot of the time, I come into a situation with a preconceived idea of how this should be solved, how this should play out. Definitely other people do that as well, so sometimes it's a little hard. People want to sometimes do things a very particular way, or that's the way that they've always done it. And, I think all you can really do then is, for me, argue my case, give them options. Look, if you really want to do this in a particular way, here's how you might be able to do that. And here are the pitfalls that you might fall into, but, you'll be able to accomplish this specific thing that you want. Alternatively, this simpler route will be, much less work, and it might get you 80% of what you're trying to do. Maybe you can do the other 20% on your front end, like, depending on the situation. But, I think you've always got to take it as a case by case. And yeah, there is no one size fits all solution. I wish that there was. That would make my job a lot easier. But yeah, I guess at that point, all you can really do is give people options. Sometimes people, if you can suggest a simple solution to something, don't get me wrong, a lot of the time people are very happy. And I love that sort of like light bulb moment when you can tell someone like gets it, like, oh yes, that's so much easier. But sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes there's a very good reason. Sometimes there's a good reason I don't know about. So yeah, like, I don't really see it as my job to tell people what they should think, how they should approach things. Same as in coffee. Like, I can't tell you what coffee you like. You know what you want. I'm there to help you get it. I'm there to assist you in whatever way that I can. And it's sort of the same in support, I guess. Obviously, for the sake of efficiency, I would like to come up with a simple solution and give it to you as quickly as possible. But otherwise, my job is to just give you options so that you can do the thing that you need to do that you feel best fits your situation.
I think that's a great way to look at it, that in support, it's about, giving options and information rather than answers and solves. And I think that because you mentioned it's such a case by case basis, especially with maybe something that is so flexible as a headless content management system, for example, or projects that are so wildly different from each other. Is it multi-channel, or is it, high volumes of content, or how many writers are they working with? So, man, you have a lot on your plate trying to figure out all the tiny little pieces and connecting those dots, and hopefully getting somewhere that's positive resolution to what they're dealing with. Whew. Don't envy
it keeps
that
me on my
approach,
toes, but
yeah.
most of the time it's pretty good. Like, most of our customers are generally in very good spirits. They're generally good people, and generally understand I'm there to help them. Sometimes I even can help them, which is a bonus. Yeah, we also have a good product. It's well documented. We have a lot of learning materials. So, I feel like a lot of the heavy lifting is usually done for me by the time someone gets into the support channel. But you do get some real stumpers now and then. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting to hear. Thanks for sharing about what you're doing every day. So I wanted to shift a little bit. We talked about your role in support, and that can be dealing with a lot of headaches or new questions. But I want to just get your general taste now about if you could give us top 3 tips on what makes a great cup of coffee and what makes a great piece of content to you. I know you talk about it's different for everybody, but I want to hear what you think and what you feel.
Okay. Well, as I said, I think the number one thing is the person, the end user, I guess you would say. I think that holds true for both. You know, comes down to know your audience, really. I mean, look, like for coffee, I can tell you like my personal preferences. Like I tend, strangely, for someone working in sort of specialty coffee, I actually tend to prefer like slightly darker roasted and something like a bit richer and more chocolatey. Most people that I used to work with like very bright fruity coffees, for example, which are great. They're just not my personal preference, given the option. But yeah, you can see how like one of those things, if you want something bright and fruity and I give you something that's like creamy and chocolatey, you're not going to think it's good, even if it's very well made and very well crafted. So I think definitely like know your audience. A little bit trite maybe, but like just always try to remember that there's a person on the other end of what you're doing. That obviously gets hammered into you pretty hard when you're interacting with that person face to face in a cafe. And, I guess also in support, I'm dealing with people in this, usually more words on a screen, but, just remembering there's a person there. But I think also the same with content. Like, it's very easy, I guess, to think about like, audiences and demographics, and like you test things and you think about your delivery channels. And I think maybe it can, that can sort of open an avenue to lose track of that. All of those numbers are people at the end of the day, and people are going to like different things. They're even going to like different things to what they normally like based on like time of day, their mood, etc. I guess that's my second point: context. This is also very important for coffee. I have read reports where people have sort of investigated this, and they will show that the music playing in a cafe will alter your perception of that coffee, or the color of the cup, or the lighting. All of these things will actually impact how you perceive flavor. Temperature is a really big obvious one. If you've ever had a cold cup of tea or a cold cup of coffee, it doesn't taste the same. And the main thing that you're going to taste is, even though it's not actually a flavor, it's just so hard to get over the wrong temperature to actually taste what's going on in that cup. So the context is super important. And I think that same holds true with content. I mean, I would say that working in the company that we work in, it's not just about having the right words or the right picture, but you got to get it to the right person at the right time in the right way. Otherwise, it's kind of useless. The day I wake up wanting that bright fruity coffee or something like light and floral, if you give me the rich chocolatey coffee that I normally like, I'm not going to be happy with it, because that's not what I wanted and not what I asked for. Similarly, I guess a piece of content that could be perfect for one audience. If you're writing for, say, a technical audience, you have to use very different language, but you might even need to deliver it differently to how you might be talking to a non-technical audience. Or, if you are delivering your content on social media, you need to use very different language and a very different approach to what you might for a blog post, for example. So, context is always very, very important.
Well,
I think that's
thanks
only
so much.
two, but
yeah, that's great. I think that's fantastic. Two good tips, and for me, I think that's fantastic parallel. I mean, the connecting of dots we've been able to do. Who knew coffee and content could end up being so similar? And so when we found that you had that vantage point, I was like, okay, we have to dig into this. So I so appreciate you sharing your perspective and your thoughts. So I wanted to wrap up today with this final question that we give all of our guests, sort of this pay it forward approach around content. So we're here to ride this content wave. So can you recommend a book or an article or podcast or piece of content, or I don't know, coffee bean, no, that you find yourself coming back to again and again and again, and let us know why.
Yes, so for me, that would definitely be How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams. So it's a book I have read at least once a year since it was published, which was a little while ago now. I think getting probably not quite 10 years, but getting on to. It's really it's really easy to read. Like, it's deliberately written with like very accessible language and sentence structure, full of like personal anecdotes, which I like, and somewhat humorous. But for example, that's where some of my ideas about like simplicity and complexity and the different value sets of people who want to like optimize and sweat over every 1%, and how that can be a good thing, but not necessarily always compatible with someone like myself who just wants to simplify and like focus on one thing at a time, and just get the things done as simply as possible to the best possible standard you can within that constraint. So that's where that idea comes from. Also, increasingly common idea of a talent stack, how adding multiple potentially unrelated talents on top of each other can result in something a little greater than the sum of its parts. There's just a lot of really good ideas in there for all different areas of life, which I think was intentional. There's stuff in there about choosing what to eat, psychology, relationships, work, but it's deliberately all sort of very general and accessible, and not actually about any of those specific things, but just new ways to think about things that we all have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate the recommendation. Awesome. I'm sure our listeners will too. So, Cameron, thank you again so much for joining us on Content Waves. Really cool to hear your story and your expertise and your perspective. And I hope the listeners enjoyed as well. So have a good one and see you next time.
Thank you for having me.